Yeah, this is me, Sujin, and it's been almost 10 years I'm in the industry. And this is my LinkedIn handle. You could search me over there and have a connection over there as well. Today, I'm going to present and show you how to automate app deployment using Microsoft Graph API and using the PowerShell. Right. So these are my agendas. Let me get you through that slide. Oh, it's right. It's okay. So today I'm going to explain what exactly the API and what does it mean by Microsoft Graph API. Also, what's inside the Microsoft Graph. That's also pretty important to know. And obviously, we'll go to the demo and end of the session. As usual, we will I'll take the questions and I'll try to answer, and we'll have a chat session over there as well. So we had the session about the API and Microsoft Graph API and the same how the Graph API would work in the last month as well. Probably you could go through that video. I will get you the YouTube video link in the chat session in a while, right? So what I'm trying to achieve here, so that's what I'm gonna explain in this slide. I want to significantly reduce the time and effort required to deploy an application across multiple devices manually, right? So generally in our legacy scenario, we create an application, we take the a group which was created, or probably you will create a new group and you will deploy to the group, and you will add the users or the devices whatever into that group, using multiple methods. So that's how generally it would work, and we all are working in that method. So I'm trying to avoid that here, and I want to minimize the human errors that can occur with the manual process. I believe you all would agree with me. When you go with any method, right? So you could create a group, you would add the members into the group, you would maybe go for a deployment. There are possibilities to end up with a human error. I'm trying to avoid that, and like I want to save the project cost in terms of both time and resources. That's also in double costs when you go for any other method, the manual method. So we probably would end up with a lots of project cost. So I'm trying to avoid that, right? I'm trying to achieve like avoid the project cost, or maybe like the resource cost, anything, right? I want my team to concentrate on strategic tasks rather than repetitive deployment activities. I believe again you all would agree with me. This deployment task, creation of application, or like it's gonna be our day-to-day activities. So when you log in, you probably will get a request to deploy a particular application to a set of users. That's gonna be like you create a group, you wait for to update the group, and with a change request, or maybe with a service request, or maybe with an incident, you will go for a deployment, and once the deployment is done, you will come back and do the other activity. So when you go for this automation, so probably you can concentrate on more tasks, maybe like more strategic tasks rather than this repetitive work. So that's what I'm trying to achieve here, how I could achieve it. So yeah, simple answer, but it's automation, right? So do the automation and try to avoid all these repetitive tasks, right? Try to avoid the maybe try to save some project cost, maybe resource cost, maybe you can probably start working on other things rather than this all these things, maybe I would say boring tasks, creating the deployment every day. It's not gonna it's not gonna be a good task technically, I would say. So we will automate maybe the deployment task using the PowerShell or maybe the Graph API, right? So now, what exactly mean by an API? API is a mechanism that enable two software components to communicate with each other using a set of definition and the protocol. So, like I said before, I have explained in our previous session as well. Probably you can go through that video. I will get you the video link in a while, right? In API, what API stands for application programming interface. In the context of API, the word application, the very first word, refer to any software with a distinct function. Okay, it can be any software, I guess, and the interface can be thought of as a contract of the service between two applications. So probably you would get confused. What does it mean by this explanation? I will explain that in a moment. So basically just remember, API stands for application programming interface, right? Application can be any application that you refer, probably in your automation context, right? So here, this how the API probably would looks like. Here you see sit on your computer, you interact with your computer, and you probably open the web portal or maybe any tool like Postman, and you write your code with the API. You put your URL, and you apply a request, and the API will go back to the server, and it will get the request done, right? So this how API would work. So API architecture usually explained in terms of client server architecture. So obviously you're going to be the client, right? And here we have a server. So this how the communication would work in between the server and the client. Application sending in a request called client, right? This is the client here, and the application sending the response is called as a server. So the server will send back the response to the end user or maybe the client with the help of API. This how it would work. So when I go for a real-time example, so like I said, this I have explained in my previous session as well. So you just think of a scenario where you go and sit on a restaurant and you order some kind of a coffee or pizza, right? And you just order to the waiter. So as soon as you sit on your chair, the waiter will come, right? The same way how the API works here, right? The waiter will come and waiter will take an order from you, and you just order for a coffee and burger something. And once the coffee and the burger order is confirmed, the waiter will go back to chef, because waiter doesn't know how to prepare the coffee or how to make the burger. So waiter will just order to chef, and chef will make your order. Chef is the one who prepare your burger, or chef is the one who prepare your coffee. Once the coffee and burger is ready, chef will call the waiter and say that the order is ready, you just go and deliver to the customer. So waiter will again come back to the chef and take the order and take your coffee and burger, and it'll deliver to you. That's how the API also working here, guys. So you are sitting in front of your computer, and you open a web portal, or you open the Postman, you open any automation tool, and you're typing your URL, you're typing your API request, and once the request is done, it'll go back to the server, and this is the server, and server will send back the request to the end user with the help of API. API is here acting as a kind of a mediator, and it's not a technical term though, so I'm just trying to make you understand how does it work, right? So here again, come to the real life scenario. Customer is ordering something, and waiter is taking the order and going back to the chef. The same way how the API was taking the request from the customer and going to the server, right? The chef will prepare the order, and waiter will deliver the order to the customer. So customer will eat that, all right? In our case, the end user, in my example, in my laptop, I will get the output as a customer get the order delivered, right? So this how the API would work in general. It's going to be very high level overview, right? You probably would get more links or more details in internet if you would if you're really keen to learn the APIs and the automation stuff, right? I would appreciate that. So what is Microsoft Graph API? Microsoft Graph API is a RESTful web API that enable you to access Microsoft Cloud Service resources. So you sitting in front of your laptop, and you're opening the Graph Explorer, and you're typing the URI, and with the help of API, you are communicating to the Microsoft Cloud Service resources. So here in our case, Microsoft Cloud Service resources as a server, and you're getting the details back to your laptop or maybe back to your screen with the help of API. All right. So Microsoft uses the HTTP method on your request to determine what request is doing. So there are multiple requests, guys. You see get, post, patch, put, delete are the HTTP methods available. When generally we work on get or post or delete methods, and that's all depends on your scenarios. If you want to delete something, you obviously have to go with the delete HTTP method. If you want to make some changes, obviously you have to go with the post or put method, right? And if you want to patch it, obviously as the name states, you have to go for the patch method, patch HTTP method. And in case if you want to get some details, and which means that you're not gonna make any changes to the end user device, or maybe on the server side, so you obviously have to go with the get method. Get methods are pretty simple because you're not going to make any changes. It's not risky though. You would just type your URI, you would just put your endpoint URL and get the details, and you would be happy with the result. That's it. But when it comes to the post or patch or put or delete, again you have to be very careful when you deal with the API request, because this gonna make some changes somewhere. So probably it can be on the server side, probably it can be on the application, or it can be anywhere. So basically when you go with the post or patch or put again or delete, you're gonna make some changes somewhere. So but when it comes to get, it's like you're just getting the information and you're gathering the information, and you're gonna do your automation with the output of get method, right? So when you do the post, patch, and the put method, you require a request body. Sometimes it's not necessary. Without request body also it would work. But see, like when you're making some changes, when you wanna do some modification, obviously you have to feed some input, isn't it? So without input, it will not make much sense maybe what changes you're gonna make. So that you have to specify in the request body. So when it comes to a request body scenario, we always 99% of the time, usually the request body would be in the JSON format. So that's how people used to code, right? Your input in the JSON format, and you just people used to feed in the like I said, the Postman or the Graph Explorer or anywhere, right? All right, Microsoft Graph API currently support two versions, guys. One is version 1.0, another one is the beta. So as name states, beta is not for it's a kind of a testing, or maybe not a production release, or maybe production version, I would say. Version 1.0 includes generally available APIs that include, and beta includes that currently in the preview. So it's a but both ways it should work. So if you go with the beta or version 1.0, both has to work. But like I mentioned here, version 1.0 includes generally available APIs, and the beta includes API that are currently in the preview. All right. So like I said, Graph Explorer, we when it comes to the Microsoft Graph API, we'll be dealing with the Graph Explorer. Graph Explorer is a web-based tool that you can use to build and test the request using the Microsoft Graph API. So you probably would need a medium, right? You probably would need an automation medium, or automation tool that you where you gonna type your code, and you gonna do all your automation activities. You could use the Graph Explorer, or maybe you could use the PowerShell, or maybe if you're good enough to use the Postman. Postman is an API tool. You could use the Postman itself. So you can use any method. So eventually you would just need the output to be get right, or maybe to be done. So but in our case, in our example, I'm going to show you the Graph Explorer as well as the uh, PowerShell. All right. So what's inside the graphics, or maybe the Microsoft Graph? What is in Microsoft Graph? Microsoft Graph expose REST API and the client libraries to access to the following cloud services, right? What are the cloud services we're going to deal with? The very first one, Microsoft 365 core services. So I have explained this on last session, but again I'm explaining because I feel some of you probably would have newly joined to the session. When it comes to the M365 core services, you probably can automate your bookings, you can automate your calendar, you can automate your Excel 365, OneDrive related stuff, SharePoint, Teams, or anything. Right. And when it comes to the enterprise mobility and security services, so here is our Intune comes. You could automate the advanced threat analytics, you could automate the protection, threat protection. Also, you could deal the Entra, Microsoft Entra, and obviously Intune as well. So that what I'm gonna do. And Windows services also can be automated, or maybe can be deal with the Microsoft Graph. And last, Dynamic 365 Business Central services also can be automated using the Microsoft Graph API. So this what comes inside, or maybe in the Microsoft Graph. Microsoft, when someone say Microsoft Graph, Microsoft Graph is a pack of all four services what I have listed here. So very first one is Microsoft 365 core services, second one is enterprise mobility plus security services, and the third one is Windows services, and the fourth one Dynamic 365 Business Center services. Hope that makes sense. So now it's the demo time. How is that? Okay. So recently I have published a blog, guys. So before I am diving into the code demo, let me explain you, let me show you what are the things you would need before you start. Probably you can call it as a prerequisites that you should know before maybe you start automating the app deployment. Very first thing, you need an application that must be created either via automation or maybe manual process, doesn't really matter, but you need an application that should be live in the Intune portal. Let's see whether that's live or not. So I have an application which I have created during our last session, which was a Microsoft Power BI report builder. I didn't deploy, so it's a store app, Microsoft Store app. It was created using our automation method itself. All right. So before you start automating, like I said, you're gonna use the Graph Explorer. So this is the Graph Explorer. When you go to the Graph Explorer, you will see a screen like this, and the very first URL you probably would see this is the one, right, and which like version 1.0 and me, and you must log in, right. I logged in as well, and I'll get you this link, guys. One second, let me open this link. Right, so this is the Graph Explorer link, and once you log in, you will have like I said, you will have this screen over here, and you must log in with your corporate credential, and you must need these two access. You must need these two permission before you do the automation activity in this particular scenario. When you go with any other automation, your access or maybe the permission would be differ. You probably would need different permission, but when it comes to this deployment automation scenario, you would need probably two access, two permission, which is device management apps read dot all permission and the read write permission. All right, and I'll get you this article. Give me a moment. And once you have all this set, you need the app ID. So how you will tell your Explorer, Graph Explorer, or maybe to the Microsoft Graph that this is the app I'm gonna deploy. So you must get the app ID. App ID will be always unique. There will be an ID. I will show you how to get that. This is the URL. How to maybe this is the URL to get the application ID or maybe app ID. And this URL, you must specify which application you're gonna deploy, or maybe which application you wanna get the app ID here. So here I said Microsoft Whiteboard. This was my previous example, but in our case, in the current example, I will change the Microsoft Whiteboard to the Power BI application, whatever I gonna check it. Right, once I get the application ID, right, I will note down that application ID. You will get an output like this in your Graph Explorer. Always remember, once you go with maybe once you click on run query, if it went well, you will get a message state that okay, 200, right, that would be more than enough. And now I have the app ID handy. Now the next thing is what I need, the security group ID as well, because our end goal is to deploy the application which was created previously to some groups, isn't it? So we need the group ID as well. So you probably can't mention or maybe say that right click and go to the deployment, maybe take a group and deploy it, right? So this is an automation. So you have to feed everything using your code. So before doing everything, you probably have to get the ID as well. So here in my case, I got the ID using this URL. Again, you could refer this, maybe you could get this from my blog, right? You will note down this ID as well, right? You need two things handy before you go for the automation. One thing, the application ID, and the last one is your device group ID, right? Once all done, once you get the app ID and the device ID, you're good to go for the uh, automation, or maybe like you good to automate your app deployment, right? So this is the URL which you will which you will use to deploy or maybe automate the app deployment. Here you will put your app ID here, and like I said, it's gonna be a post call, it's not gonna be a get call. So the app URL or maybe the endpoint which we discussed already, like which you will get the app ID and the security ID, was a get method, get HTTP method, because you were collecting some information, you were gathering some details. Here when it comes to the deployment, you are making some changes, right? So you would go with the post method, right? You have to put the app ID over here. And obviously when it comes to the post method, if you recall my statement, you need something in the can you please be on mute, Dheeraj? you need something in your input, right? You have to something, you have to put some data, whatever the things you want to make the changes in your body. So this is going to be a body, right? This has to be in the same format. And see here, I have mentioned the deadline as well. Here you could do it, or maybe if you don't want to mention the deadline, in case if you want to do a as soon as possible deployment, you could just take this out, and without, if you like didn't mention the deadline, it will go for an as soon as possible deployment. That's also you have to keep in mind. So you must notice one thing, the deadline date time is in something like in a weird format, right? It's not our normal date and time format. It's in the ISO 8601 time format. I have written a PowerShell script to convert any time, right? Probably this how we generally go for time. So you see the input date and time, it's in our normal format. This is our legacy format, I would call. So if you feed, or if you put as this as an input, my PowerShell code will get you the date and time, or maybe deadline time in ISO 8601 format. You could use this code, right? I will show you, right, how you could use that. And obviously at last, you're gonna just call the URL what I mentioned here with the app ID and with this input, and the deployment should work, right? Let's start working on it, right? So let me get the very first URL. I need to get the app ID first. Okay, so let me, I have a cheat sheet here, right? So I'll just go for that. So here I'm going to get the ID, display name, and the description. The reason why I go for the display name and the description, I just want to confirm I'm getting the ID of a particular application which I wanted to. I just want to double confirm with the name and the description. So I will just go with that. I'm not getting the option to. Okay. All right. Oh, okay, it should work now. So I'm getting the option to run the query here. I'll just run the query. All right, here since it's a get a call, I didn't add anything in the request body. So this is gonna be my ID. I will just copy this ID and keep it in my cheat sheet. Okay, that's I already have it in my sheet. So what is next? Now I have to get the group ID of the security group which I have, which I gonna do the deployment. All right, so I just gonna copy the URL which I mentioned in my blog, right? I'll just run that and see. In this URL you probably would see you have to mention the display name of your security group which you're gonna deploy the application, which is in your list, which whatever the application you want to deploy it, you maybe you decided, okay, maybe you created a new security group, and probably maybe you have to or you want to deploy it to the group which you already have. So that really doesn't matter. You just need to mention the display name of that security group. You will get the ID here like this. You see the display name, just want to confirm this. Yeah, this is my security group, and this is the ID. So I will just copy this ID and keep it in my cheat sheet. All right, so these are the two things I need to collect before I'm doing the automation, guys, right? So next thing is what I'm going to make the deployment. So deployment, obviously it's going to be a post call, so I will make the changes here. I'll change it as a post, right? So here I have to make the changes. Here it is an app ID, just in the flower bracket it says app ID, right? So obviously I have to change it, right? I'm going to change it now. What's that? It's my app ID. All right, so I'll just do like this. And yeah, I have to add the request body as well. So this is going to be my request body. I will do one thing. I'll just copy from here. Where's my input? All right, I'll just copy this, right? And maybe I'll change the date here, 6. Maybe I'll say 28. Right, so this is the required deployment, and I'm setting the deadline as well, right? I'll just close all these things, and I'll just run this query, right? This is an error. Okay, probably it's because of this again. Cannot convert the literal. I think it's because of this one. Let me double check that. Okay. Oh yeah, this doesn't really work, I believe. Yeah, it created the deadline, date and time. What I have given was wrong, so the deployment is created. Now you see the intent is required, so it's direct, and all the details are shown here. Now I'll go to my Intune portal. So this was the app which I showed you. I will just refresh it. Right, I'll just click on it and go to the properties. Right, you see, right, this was the time what I had given, 11:59 p.m. All right, now what I will do, I will just click on assignment, and I will just delete this deployment, right, and save. Okay. Okay, now I'll show you how I can do the as soon as possible deployment. So this was the area where I was mentioning, where I put the deadline, isn't it? So I will just take that out. Right, let me run that now. I'll just comma. Right, so again it's created. Right now the deployment will be like as soon as possible, because I didn't mention any deadline, you see. Okay, I'll just close all these things. Right, I'll just refresh again. I'll just go to the properties. See, as soon as possible, you see the deployment. Now it is set as soon as possible. Previously it was with a deadline. All right, so that's it about the Graph Explorer deployment, I believe. And I could show the script, right, which I have already. See, this is the PowerShell
Mhm.
script. This is a
Okay.
PowerShell script where you can convert your normal date time format to the ISO format, which I showed you. So in this example, I probably would say like 7, right? 23. What's the date today? 28, right? Maybe not 7. Say 6, right? And uh, maybe like 1 p.m. All right. So I'll just run this code. All right, the code was run. There's an error. String was not recognized as a valid time format. I think there's some error. Okay, I'll try this. Yeah, this time it worked. So yeah, you could just call this one, right? Maybe I will say out output date and time. So it's in the ISO format, you see. All right. Okay, this how you could convert your normal datetime format, what you generally use to do the deployment, to a ISO format. And when it comes to the Graph Explorer API or maybe the automation, you must specify the deadline in this format. So that's the reason I have developed this code and included, maybe added in my blog. You could refer that. And when it comes to the PowerShell automation stuff case, like we currently we have automated the app deployment using the Graph Explorer, right? So the same thing can be done using the PowerShell as well. So the problem with the Graph Explorer here, now you either first thing you have to get the group ID and the app ID as well. So but when it comes to the PowerShell, I have developed a code wherein you could you could get everything in a single script, and without noting it down anywhere, you could do the deployment. Let me show you that. Right, before that, let me delete this deployment. Right, if any deployment is available, my automation will fail. So I will just delete this. Right, and I'll say save. Okay, all good. Let me go to my Visual Studio. So this is the code. Right, you could take this code from your, I mean, from my blog. Right, this is the Power BI report builder. This is the app which I gonna make the deployment. And here using this URI, so which I already showed you. Right, I'm getting the app ID. Right, here initially I'm getting the app ID here using the the very first URL, and I'm getting the value of the app ID, and I'm saving it in the dollar app ID variable. Okay, the next thing is get a group ID. Right, the group ID also would trigger or maybe generate, or maybe you could store it in a variable using the second URI here. All right, so once that is done, so you have to generate a request body, right? You have to request, maybe the group id is saved somewhere in the variable. You could just call that variable here, and that's it. And here deadline, you see, deadline was set like this, right? Probably I'm gonna do the deployment, or maybe make the deployment as for next month. You see the date, so 7/11, right? I will try to run this code and see what changes it would make. And always remember this body, the request body has to be in this format. It has to be in the JSON format. If not, even the PowerShell code also will not work. All right, and now I will have a maybe a new URL which would which would capable to do the deployment, right? Which I already showed you, right? Instead of putting the app ID, I just put the app ID in a variable, right? Instead of putting directly as a maybe a letter or code, whatever, I would store it in a variable, dollar app ID, and I will just call using the invoke mg graph request. Always remember, before you run this code, you must log in, or maybe you must connect your graph using the connect mg graph, right? We have the article that explain how to connect to the mg graph, right? Always remember, you have to see the scope, device management, read write all, which I already explained you, right? So I'm all set to run this code, I believe, right? Invoke, and yeah, I'll just run this. Hope I will not get any error. So yeah, note you can use no welcome command, probably. Yeah, it's connected to graph, right? All done. So it was quick, within second, I believe. The deployment was done, right? So I'll just click on this, go to the properties. You'll see this. Our first example was set to deploy the application today itself, and the second one was as soon as possible. The third example what I showed you is set to deploy it on next week, probably on July 7th, right? So that's what I have set here in the PowerShell code. Hope that makes sense. All right, I believe I'm done. I will get you the article link. If you have any question, just unmute yourself.
Sujin, I have a question. Sujin, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
When you are showing us during the get, you are giving the group name,
Uh-huh.
and during the post, do you giving the group name or any ID over there? Because I
Yeah.
couldn't find it over there.
Yes, it was that. So that's what I was explaining. You must give everything in the request body. You see this group
Okay.
ID here, right? And here I'm not giving any application name, but instead application name, I'm giving the app ID here in the URL itself. You see the mobile app. Generally, when you Google or when you try to get the uh, uh, post or details or URL details, it will be like in a flower bracket, right? And it will say that Microsoft would ask you to put the app ID here like this, right? So instead, I just took out all this app ID of flower bracket. I just applied the app ID which I have collected using my previous URL.
No,
Get my point?
what I was telling, no, what I was asking is when you were finding the HTMD user group, you are giving it and you say a run query that you got
And oh,
ID
okay,
over
okay. That was a get call, buddy. No, we don't need to give
there. Okay,
any input over there. Yeah, that was the advantage. I was explaining when you go for the get call without any request body, without any probably the what input, you will get the in output. So when it comes to post, you need to give something. I can show you that again.
okay,
Yeah,
okay.
let me get that example somewhere here. Yeah, this is the URI I was trying. Right here in my case, I'll just change to post. Yeah, I'll show you. Okay, right here I delete everything. Right, no request body. You see, this is the HTMD test computer. This is my test group. All right, this is a get HTTP method. Say
Yeah.
yeah, I'll just call it, and I got the ID here in the output. Right, I didn't feed
Okay.
anything in the request body or in the input.
Okay. By this, during the post, you can use it. Correct.
Yeah, you have to collect it. You
Uh,
have to collect it and keep it with you, right? Probably you can save it in your cheat sheet. But when you go with the PowerShell script, you probably no need to initially collect the app ID and then later collect the group ID and go for the deployment. You no need to collect it anywhere. So you could probably use everything in a single code. Maybe the code is good enough to collect everything by its own and do the deployment.
Okay.
But
So,
yeah, we have to make it handy.
so this ID is nothing but the ID which is available in the Intune. Is it the correct
Yeah,
understanding?
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it's absolutely. This is your group unique ID.